Welcome to my coding school. So let's continue with the CSS Grid layout. So in the last video, we left off when we had covered the grid template column property and then the grid template row down here, which are basically properties that are used to set the number of rows or columns. And then we looked at the repeat function that is used to specify the rows or the columns and then giving a size for each. For the rows, it will be a width. And then for the column, for the rows, it will be a height. And then for the columns, it will be width. So now let's look at the min-max function, which is used to allow 12 pixel to start with, and then a fraction by which a row can grow, a column can grow. So we are going to apply this min-max function to a column, and then we try to resize the window. So I will come here, and then here instead of repeat for these columns, I'll use the min-max, and then I'll pass in the 200 pixels by which it should shrink, and then one fraction to grow, and then I'll save. And then if I come to the browser and then I resize the window, you will see that it will grow, it will reduce up to 100 pixels, of which it will start to overflow. And then if I take it back to the full window, it will take in all the available space. So now let's look at something else. Let us look at the grid template, which is the shorthand for both the grid template columns and then the grid template rows. So here I'll go back into the code, and then instead of applying these two properties, I'll comment them out, and then I'll use the grid template here, and then I'll bring the rows first, copy this, then I'll paste it here, and then I'll separate them with the forward slash, and then I go now to the columns. I'll bring this code snippet, and then I'll put it below here, and then I'll save. Then if I go into the browser, we should have the same thing. So this is the shorthand for both the rows and then the columns. So moving on, we have a set of properties that deal with spacing between rows and columns. So here we have the column gap property, which is used to set the space between the columns, and then we have the row gap, which is used to set the spacing between the rows, and then the gap property, which is the shorthand for both. So let's see this in the UI. So I'll leave this. So I'll write column gap, give it 10 pixels, save, and then if I come into the browser, we should have a space between the columns, and then I'll press Alt and Shift and then duplicate this, and then I'll go to the rows, then save. We should have now equal spaces between the rows, then the columns, and then I can comment out this and then use the gap, and then I can specify 20 pixels for the rows and then 40 pixels for the columns. And then if I go into the browser, we should have this spacing. We start with the rows 20, then the columns 40. So this is how we use those properties that sets the spacing. The next is the properties that deal with alignment. So we have two types of alignments here. We have the alignment within the cell and then the alignment within the grid container. So let's start with alignment within the cells. So to align grid items along the row axis, we use the justify items property. By default, it is stretch, meaning the items will stretch to take up the entire space, and then the other values can be start, end, and then center. So now let's use this property. So we shall come here to the container and remove the gap, we don't need it. And then I'll use justify items, and then by default it will be straight. If go to the browser, we should have the same output because it's the default. And then I can apply start. Save. Now they will be at the start of their cells. So if I go to inspect, and then I come to the body, then to this container here, you will see now that each of these is at the start of their rows. And then here, if I click on this grid, it will give me other rows, and then their columns. So this is where you can debug the layout from. So the next value is end, save, and then they will be at the end of their cells. And then the other one is center, save, and then we shall have this in the center. So that's how justify items work. So alignment within the cell, to align grid items along the column axis, we use align items. So justify items is along the row axis, and then align items is along the column axis. So the default value is still stretch, and then it still has the same values of start, end, and then center. So here I'll remove this, and then I will use align items, and then set it to stretch. So to back to the browser, we shall see that we have this. But now to notice the difference, I will simply now set the height of this, since we are dealing with the column axis, and now we have this. So now I'll start with the start, and then they will be at the top of their cells, and then end, they will be at the bottom, and then center, and they will be at the center. So that's how we deal with the alignment of items on the column axis. And then we have the place items property, which is used to specify both the properties around the row and then the column. So here, instead of align items, I'll use place items, and then if I add in center, this will be the default value for all of them if I specify only one. But then if I use, for example, start and then end, and this will be the row, and then this will be the column. So save, and then they will be at that side, and then if I put in end, save, they will be at that side. So you can practice with these values to see the different kinds of outputs. So that's the first one, alignment within the cell. So we also have now alignment within the container. So we can make some changes to have 3 rows and then 3 columns, each with 20 pixels, and then set the height, and then we shall be able to notice the changes. So let's do this. So in the code, we already have this. I'll remove the min max. I'll remove the min max function here, and then I'll simply put in 200 pixels, and then here I'll also put in 200 pixels, and then save, go into the browser, and then I'll remove this, save. Then we have this kind of setup. So we have here, there's supposed to be three rows like this, and then I'll be back to this kind of setup. So what I'll do here is I'll set this to 800, and then we are going to start to align items along the row axis, so we can use justify content. So this has a number of properties. So the default value is set to the start, and then other values we can have our end, center, space between, and then space around. So let's begin at this property in the very next video.